and welcome to the newsroom with Sana. Today we're going to take a look at a number of important developments around the world. The first is with reference to what is happening in Davos, and of course in light of the developing situation around Greenland as world leaders gathered in Switzerland. It's very important, of course, to see what aspects are discussed, and as the forum represents these key issues, it is not just economy that was centered on. The focus remained on what is happening in Greenland, and with Mr. Trump also taking the stage in terms of what he plans to do next, clarifying that he does not wish to and does not intend to use force. However, it remains to be seen what then will be the action that the U.S. takes, because he did again verify that he wants to take ownership of Greenland. And what would that mean in terms of any aspects that are in discussion with Denmark and other EU states remains to be seen, and also what options are going to be exercised by the EU in retaliation. Many different aspects were discussed by different world leaders in response to Mr. Trump's statements, and we'll be focusing more on that in our first segment. Next, we're going to take a look at what is happening in terms of the phase 2 that is being spoken about and pushed forward by the United States with the implementation of the Board of Peace, with Pakistan also accepting the invitation along with other world leaders, and most notably also Netanyahu. This is important, particularly in terms of the actions that, despite such invitations and their acceptances, are being taken by Israeli occupation forces, not just against the people of Gaza and Palestine, but also against aid agencies, including the UNRWA, which is the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees, whose camps and buildings have been bulldozed. And this is, of course, very integral in terms of the violation of international law and the respect that needs to be guaranteed of such UN bodies. Of course, this has garnered international condemnation, but will there be more than just that remains to be seen. And lastly, we're going to take a look at what is happening in Bangladesh as the days for the elections come soon. This is, of course, very integral in terms of identifying who it is that is going to be the most likely candidate and which party is gaining ground. It seems that the Jamaat in Bangladesh is gaining more and more ground in terms of what is happening in the way that the people are looking at the party to support and what the polls represent, and what seems to be an option that perhaps wasn't there for a decade in the country is now on the table. And so the main contenders, Jamaat-e-Islami and the BNP, the rivalry of course exists strong, but what really is going to be the option that the people use and what is going to be the impact of that on ground will be part of our discussion as well. We're now going to start off with our first segment in terms of what is going on in Davos and take a look at what is happening as part of the discussions that have centered around this very important platform, especially with regards to Greenland. For that, we've been joined by Editor-in-Chief, PakistanTV Digital, Mr. Saqib Tanveer. Thank you, Saqib, for joining us in the newsroom today. Your perspective first in terms of what really is going on in Davos, in terms of the sentiment that we're getting in from different world leaders, particularly after the U.S. president's speech. It was something that everybody had eyes and ears on. And so in terms of how the international community has responded to this speech, what's your take from on the ground?
Eventful day, Sana, here. President Trump was supposed to come in by 2:30 a.m. 2:30 p.m. His speech was scheduled for 2:30 p.m. But early morning, the news came in that his plane had an minor electrical issue, and that's why it had to go back, and then he had to change his plane, and then he came in. And the event almost started at time, probably 10 minutes late. But before the event had started, before his speech had begun, there was a lot of anticipation. I was there in the Congress hall, and I saw that there was a huge queue of people trying to get into the hall just to listen to what Donald Trump has to say. And the importance of his words, it got more important, especially after when Emmanuel Macron, he addressed the forum yesterday, and he took indirect jabs at President Trump. So President Trump came in. It was 90 minutes long speech, 75 minutes speech, and 15 minutes fireside chat. And most of that, it centered around attacks on Western countries, European countries, US's allies. And surprisingly, there are two people who earned praise. One is Putin, and the other one is Xi Jinping. So it was a very strange, very interesting kind of speech from President Trump, where you would expect America to stand by its traditional allies and go against China and Russia. But in this case, President Trump did the opposite, and he praised the two people that probably Europe would not want to praise right now.
Right, and Saqib, you're forgetting another praise that Mr. Macron also got for his glasses. But on a more serious note, when we take a look at what the result of these interactions has been, what is the sentiment that you see coming in from EU world leaders, especially given the stances that they're giving with regards to Greenland, the harsh statements they're getting to hear from the US president? Are they meeting on the sidelines? Are they interacting with each other? Is there any interactions that you've seen happening that can possibly seem to have a thawing of relation or a warming of the sentiment between the two sides?
So there's a very important meeting that's happening tomorrow in Brussels, which is a G7. Donald Trump will not be attending that meeting, but it's expected that Europe might put up a unified front in that meeting. But after the speech, I had a small chat with delegates from Norway and France. So the French delegation was of the view that, President Trump criticizing Emmanuel Macron in the speech and, talking about the prescription drugs and saying that he agreed to his demands in 3 minutes. It might come as insult to people from the outside, but people in France, they wouldn't mind that, because people in France really, they are anti-Trump sort of thing. So President Macron would be earning brownie points from that. But the delegate from Norway, she was very concerned. She said that, Europe is in a fix, and if Donald Trump tries to take Greenland by force or by annexation, a simple procedure, then it would wreak havoc for the alliance between Europe and the US, and it might also lead to the end of NATO.
Right, Saqib, last question. We're also hearing reports of Zelensky arriving in Davos soon to meet with the US president. Do you have any report on that?
Yeah, President Trump did mention in his speech that he'll be meeting Zelensky today, so he is here. But most of the discussion, it currently centers around Greenland. President Trump will definitely want to implement his 20-point peace plan for Ukraine, and for that, meeting with him is very important. President Trump also has Steve Witkoff with him, who is the point man on these talks between Russia and Ukraine. So you might expect another statement coming in from Zelensky, where he would say that a headway has been reached in terms of negotiations with Russia. So it's an important meeting. President Trump has 3 rooms booked here at Davos, where he's conducting his meetings, and some very important meetings are going to happen tonight.
Great. Thanks a lot, Saqib Tanveer, for joining us and sharing your views. There's a lot happening on ground in Davos, and of course a lot of this is centered around discussions on where exactly world leaders will go ahead in the current international dynamics post what has happened in Venezuela, and of course now in terms of the US plans in Greenland. While it has been clear by the president that he does not intend to use force, it remains to be seen what other options he is willing to exercise and whether or not the military intervention is truly off the table. For that, we've been joined by Dr. Syed Mohammed Ali, who's the professor at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali, for being part of the newsroom. In terms of what you've seen so far in the kind of statement that we've heard coming in from the US president, he has clarified that he does not intend to use force and that he will not be using force. But given what has happened recently in Venezuela as well, given the fact that the kind of history that we have seen the US undertake itself in, and then when we understand Mr. Trump and his personality, do you think that that is really off the table for the US?
I think use of force is unlikely. Also because of the architecture of the NATO system, although NATO has been under increasing strain and pressure by President Trump in his first term, and now being criticized for largely European leaders being criticized for not paying the bills of defending Europe, and the US having that onerous task. And that is what has led more recently during the second President Trump term to many European countries slashing their development budget. So it doesn't hurt public spending domestically, but they have shriveled their international aid programs in order to ramp up funding for NATO. And there is also, of course, a serious threat within Europe with Ukraine and Russia sort of flexing its muscles. So this kind of need to ramp up defense expenditure is not coming out of nowhere. However, the US attacking, and taking Greenland by force would be unprecedented and there's already contention within the US with what it's trying to do in South America, but the US has had a history of imperialism there. It squarely taking on another NATO member country and antagonizing all of Europe would be too large a bet, particularly when it comes to the actual, I mean, yes, Greenland has rare earth and critical mineral deposits, no doubt, and with the melting Arctic ice, it is opening up the Northern Sea routes, and there is contestation there with Russia and China, but that is not a severe threat. For China, the Arctic is very far away. It's now, investing in some ice breaking vessels, but largely its activities are concentrated in the north of Russia. It is not a serious threat, nor is Russia planning to take over Greenland. So what President Trump has done is he's tried to talk of the need to acquire Greenland as this kind of extension of its national security concerns and linking it to this kind of Monroe Document 2.0. But I don't think that he would go to the extent of using military force to acquire Greenland.
Right. Mr. Ali, stay with us and I'll come back to you with more. We've also been joined by Robert Grenier, who's former CIA official and advisor to Elixir International. Thank you, Robert, for being part of the newsroom today. I'd like your take in terms of how you're seeing the current situation and helping us understand what really is the American interest and what is it that Mr. Trump is referring to in practical terms when he says he will not use force, but he does want ownership of Greenland to truly defend it. What would that mean on ground in terms of the U.S. having ownership of Greenland?
Well, quite frankly, it would mean very little. The U.S. would be able to say that it owns Greenland, and I suppose that would give President Trump a certain emotional satisfaction. In fact, he has said quite openly, when asked why he feels the need for the U.S. to actually have sovereignty over Greenland, he said that it would make him feel better, in effect. In listening to my colleague there for a moment, talking about the possibility of the U.S. invading Greenland, well, let's just say for a moment that the U.S. did, in fact, send large numbers of troops into Greenland. The members of NATO, and in fact, Denmark itself, could simply shrug their shoulders and say, fine, you are already using the authorities that we have given you as a result of the treaty that we, Denmark, signed with the United States in 1951, which allows the U.S. to send any number of troops to Greenland that it desires in order to assure its defense. So if the Europeans were simply to say, okay, fine, you are using the authorities that we have given you by treaty, but we don't accept your sovereignty over the country, well, what would the United States do? In fact, it would change absolutely nothing.
Right. Thank you, Robert. Stay with us and I'll come back to you. We're going to see what the Canadian Prime Minister actually said at Davos as well. And let's hear from what world leaders are talking about in terms of the U.S. intention. We'll come back and discuss some more.
For now to go it alone. They have the market size, the military capacity, and the leverage to dictate terms. Middle powers do not. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination. Stop invoking rules-based international order as though it still functions as advertised. Call it what it is, a system of intensifying great power rivalry where the most powerful pursue their interests using economic integration as coercion.
Well, you heard what world leaders are saying. And Mr. Ali, I'll come back to you now in terms of how we're looking at the options that can be exercised from those who are opposing the U.S.'s intentions, particularly the EU, and of course other countries like Canada. What is the extent to their involvement and the extent to which they can truly push back? There is, of course, a lot of discussion around the EU employing the trade bazooka, but in fact, do you think that there is anything really that can stop the U.S. interest in Greenland at this point in time, given the fact that we hear Mr. Trump saying he's open for negotiations, but that's something that he just wants to chalk out in terms of his actual plan of ownership?
Well, no. So to think of Greenland as a sovereign, as a part of the American territories is where the problem would lie. Because that is what undermines the sort of many of the rationale put forth, in this kind of strategic framing, this national security framing of Greenland and the threat from Russia and China, because the NATO architecture is already there. But the assertion seems to be to take control of Greenland, and that is where Denmark and other European powers would find that to be a problem. And as far as Canadian Prime Minister's speech goes, I think it is a sort of signal, and it's a signal. I mean, this is Western allies, where European countries are also sort of seeing this dismantlement of the international world order and this idea of economic coercion being used. So things like sort of tariffs being used as tools of coercion and leverage. The ability of middle powers like Canada, and I mean here the also countries of the global south, we can think of BRICS, then being increasingly sidelined in this kind of reassertion of a global order which is fraying, right? A ruptured global order this is where we have to see a lot of innovation being put forth, because it is creating this withdrawal, American withdrawal from the international order, be it its withdrawal from the climate summits, be its withdrawal from multilateralism, from the international aid sector, is providing a space for others to step in. But the European and sort of Canada itself are not necessarily the places where one needs to look for leadership. One also needs to sort of think of the rising power from the global south. And there are contestations. I mean, India is a rising power, but India is also locked in contestation with China. I mean, it also has hegemonic aspirations when it comes to broader South Asia. So it's not that there is consensus in the global south. So we see this kind of rupture to the rule-based, I mean, not a very level playing field, rule-based international order, but we do see a rupture, and we are yet to see the evolution of newer forms of regional integration, newer forms of sort of strategic alignment, the shape that middle powers are going to take in terms of dictating, in terms of influencing this international order. So we are sort of experiencing this international flux. I mean, we should also note how President Trump is also, when he talks about Europe, he also expresses concern and sort of whips up these fears of Europe being invaded by the global south. And those fears are fears that also resonate within Europe itself. But that is again a part of the remaking of a global order, where when you're thinking demographics, when you are thinking sort of this post-colonial world order and the rise of sort of new middle powers, the rise of Asia, we are going to see a world that is going to look quite different in the coming decades than it has in the past.
Right. Thank you for that, Mr. Ali. Stay with us and I'll come back to you. We're going to take a quick look at what Mr. Trump said and just reiterate once again how he has clarified what U.S. intentions are.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay, now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland. And the fact is, no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States. We probably won't.
Robert, I'll come back to you in terms of how we see Mr. Trump and the rhetoric that he uses. Do you think that the international community has gotten used to the statements that he's making? Because we saw a lot of these being targeted towards the EU, towards Canada, towards NATO in general. And so in terms of how we see the international order and its dynamics changing, what is it that you think is at the table for other nations in terms of what they're willing to accept coming in from the US and what they will push back on, and whether or not that can truly influence Mr. Trump's decision making?
Yes, I think that other nations clearly have levers that they can use with the United States. Now, I think that although President Trump has signaled the fact that he no longer believes in the international order as it has been created since World War II, I think that the Europeans in particular have been trying very, very hard not to push the situation too far, because they still, in the short term, at least in the medium term, very much depend on the US and its support, particularly in the context of Ukraine. And they are loath to put themselves in a situation where the US entirely walks away from Ukraine, removes all of its intelligence support to Ukraine, and otherwise fully compromises the Ukrainian defensive stance vis-a-vis Russia. The Europeans very much want to avoid that, and therefore they're trying not to further provoke the president. But if push comes to shove, they certainly have tools that they can use. Now, the Europeans have talked about the fact that they have an anti-coercion mechanism that is available to them, which, among other things, would enable them to ban US high-tech companies from doing business in Western Europe. That would have very serious consequences for the US economy, and therefore very serious consequences for domestic politics within the United States. Again, they're loath to do that, but that's something that they could do. Let's remember that when the US was trying to use coercive tariff measures against China, the Chinese had a very strong counter, and that was to ban the export of rare earth minerals and the magnets that are derived from them, which are absolutely crucial for many important industries, to include defense industries. As soon as the Chinese did that, the US backed off. Now, the Europeans don't have a lever quite as potent as that, but they do have potent levers. And if they were to use them and to decide that things had deteriorated to the point where they needed to use them, I think it might give President Trump serious pause.
Right. And Robert, what about this sentiment within the United States as well? Is there pressure coming in from within the United States towards the Trump administration or the president himself in terms of his intentions or actions that he's taken recently and what he intends to do in Greenland? What is it that the public wants, and whether or not there can be powers such as the Senate or the Congress or the Democrats that can curb some of this this sentiment or this stance that he's currently taking?
Well, I think the reaction within the United States to President Trump's recent moves with regard to Greenland has been a little bit like the reaction that we've seen in Europe. That is, it's one of shock. But now all parties are beginning to adjust to this, and they're beginning to stake out positions. Now, right now, because of the current division of power within the US government, the fact that the Republicans have majorities both in the House and the Senate, as well as the White House, right now, it very much depends on the reaction among Republicans. The initial reaction among Republicans, particularly in the Senate, has been a very negative one. Now things are evolving a little bit further. We're beginning to see a number of Republicans, particularly in the House, who are now aligning themselves with the president and who are beginning to parrot the same rhetoric that the president has been using with regard to Greenland. But if there is pain associated with this, if the US begins to suffer serious trade and economic consequences as a result of pushback by the Europeans, I think that will give many in the U.S. political system pause. And I think that they would begin to move behind the scenes, at least, to try to influence the president to back off of his current moves.
Thank you very much, Robert, for joining us and being a part of the newsroom today. Mr. Ali, I'll come back to you. In terms of the developments that we see taking place in the international community, there's also, of course, the question with regards to the Board of Peace, and we're going to be discussing in our next segment. But your take on that is important to the extent when we take a look at whether or not that can possibly be another alternative way of doing things other than the United Nations. And so a lot of these questions are being discussed, and even Mr. Trump was questioned with regards to what this would mean and what this would represent, and he referred to what he called the lack of successes of the UN not being able to achieve much, and so the Board of Peace can potentially be that platform. Do you think that the US can actually utilize such a platform for purposes other than what it was initially intended for?
Well, that's been an assessment by Haaretz in Israel just after this board was announced, because it does not limit the focus of its mission or its mandate only to addressing the Palestinian question. It seems to want to create a parallel multilateral initiative that sidelines the UN system and has President Trump as its chief executive, has his son-in-law on the board, has a real estate tycoon, Mr. Witkoff on it. So a very top-heavy sort of, President Trump and his allies board, and the invitation has been sent out to 77 countries. We have seen some Middle Eastern countries join. We've heard about Pakistan, we've heard about Turkey, we've heard about some Central Asian countries having accepted the offers, but we've also heard about France not wanting to join. And, even if we look at the near future where it would want to contend with the trouble in Palestine, while there is, news of Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu having accepted the invitation to join this board, we don't have significant Palestinian representation, and this, continued insistence by President Trump at the World Economic Forum when he was asked this, when he had a bilateral with the Egyptian President Sisi, saying that Hamas needs to be disarmed, and Hamas remains unwilling to disarm, and the settler violence in the West Bank, sort of the disarray of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas's resilience in Gaza, and the dire situation on the ground in Gaza remain major challenges. And it seems quite a tall order for this board to even bring about some semblance of justice, some semblance of peace, while the president of the World Bank has also signed on, and some Gulf states could throw money at this problem. But prior to that, there needs to be some kind of consensus. There needs to be some willingness of Israel to sort of stop what it's been doing after the ceasefire, in order for it to actually operationalize, and then we would see what form it morphs into, or if it just dissipates during this process, or after whatever it claims to have achieved in solving the Palestinian question.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali, for being part of the newsroom and sharing your views. That is indeed an aspect, and it's important not just in terms of what it represents in the international community, but particularly what it's also doing in terms of the success and limitations that it might have towards what the people of Gaza truly are aspiring towards. And for that, we've also been joined by former Ambassador Dr. Jamil Khan, and we're going to be speaking to him with regards to what the situation is on the ground. Thank you very much, Dr. Jamil, for being part of the newsroom today. I'd like your take on terms when we see what is happening on ground. There's, of course, a lot of question marks in terms of the first phase, and this move towards the second phase is integral and is dependent on a lot of the aspects that the first phase was meant to cover. But regardless, when we see developments taking place, such as the Board of Peace, that is an essential step in phase 2. How do you see the current developments taking place in the Board of Peace? And we were just discussing whether or not it could truly be a rival setup to the UN, as many are speaking about. What is your take in terms of the possibilities of that happening? And then, of course, the role that different countries can play together for peace in Gaza. Because initially, of course, it was meant to fulfill a lot of the aspects as part of the ceasefire and the peace deal that was brokered earlier, but now seems to have a more over-encompassing role.
Well, it needed some clarity right from the very beginning. One thing is for sure that Israel, of course, has to be really deterred from violating or the peace plan, which Israel is signatory of it, and he agreed to the peace plan. Now, what excuses Israel has been finding that since the first phase, once it's almost complete, except for one body, that body which could not be retrieved because of the rebels and because of other difficulties which Hamas was facing, it is almost whatever was decided in phase 1 was done. Now, phase 2 was delayed, as a matter of fact, and I've been really advocating that phase 2 is connected with phase 1, and if it's delayed, then we lost 400 lives, further 400 lives. If the phase 2 was also deployed on time, then perhaps we would have saved those lives also. Phase 3 is dependent on phase 2. So all these phases are connected. There are a lot of loose ends. There are questions about the international law. There are criticism, that's all true. And even if we talk about the peace and the peace plan, 20 points peace plan, yes, I think all of us, I could come up with about 20 points criticism on 20 points. But then I ask a question to myself, and I've been alluding it in various television programs, that in the given circumstances, in the surrounding circumstances, in the atmosphere which we had in Gaza, where Israel was all set to massacre about 300,000 people who were left in Gaza, that particular circle which was encircled by Israel prior to the ceasefire and was announced in October. And Israel forces were just closing in to massacre that. So at least these 8 countries, Pakistan included in those 8 countries, they joined their heads together. And while there was a General Assembly session going on, and all these leaders, they thought to really play their role, and they played a very, I would say, diplomatic role. Is it ideal? No, as I already said, it's not ideal the plan. But was there any other alternative to stop Israel? United Nations tried it about 6 times. It failed. United Nations had also passed a Security Council resolution in 2024 for the ceasefire. Israel didn't respect it. The only mechanism was, the only country which could stop Israel was the United States of America, and the most powerful president of the United States of America, which has the most powerful military of the world and the most powerful country, therefore. So therefore, they are the one, they were able to impose, or they were able to get it accepted from Israel. Because I've been saying it, that Israel is United States and United States is Israel. So United States can always prevail. Now, the second point is that Board of Peace. These are the mechanisms to implement that peace plan, of those 20-point peace plan. Now, unless this Board of Peace start functioning properly, it's announced that's And I have been saying that Pakistan should immediately accept the offer, should not delay it. And I'm glad that Pakistan accepted it on time. They could have done it even yesterday, but that's fine. And now, because if we were left behind, I'm hearing some of the comments which were opposing our inclusion and our joining this board of peace. But then we would have been left behind. At least Pakistan would have a voice there. Pakistan would have its own way to in the decision making and in the decision making where the peace and tranquility had to be maintained and has to be maintained in Gaza. And why I am optimistic about it, that it would, although they could tilt towards Israel, because I see the members, most of the members have more inclination and more loyalty towards Israel. That is also true. But the other members, including the Muslim countries, 8 countries, and other Muslim countries, plus those 59 countries reportedly have already accepted the offer. One more country, and then the complete number would be completed, those 60 countries. Once they sit together, then once there's a consultation, obviously Israel, and for even for the chairman of the board, which is the president of United States of America, it would be hard for him to totally brush it out. Although he still maintains his power, and he has said that he would be a lifetime chairman of the Board of Peace. But anyways, time would tell about it. But at least for now, he's the chairman. And the criticism which you had asked question in one of the parts of your question was about the United Nations. Is it United Nations is the powers enshrined in the Charter of United Nations are going to be undermined? Yes. It is going to be undermined because it's almost a body which is going to implement those points or those the mandated
Absolutely.
points
And
of United
Dr. Jamil,
States.
that is essential, but also let's focus on what is happening as part of the Board of Peace. As you mentioned, it's important for us to understand how that is going to look on ground and what it's going to achieve. And so especially when we talk about Gaza and what is intended here, we see countries that have been invited to be part of this Board of Peace, including Pakistan, who has accepted and of course would like to see this result in truly what the people of Palestine aspire towards and according to international norms and traditions. But there are other countries that are in leaderships that are also being involved, and most notably, of course, Netanyahu himself, that is part of the Board of Peace. And this is, of course, coming from a leadership and it's occupying forces that has just recently also attacked the UN body for Palestinian refugees, and that is being condemned internationally. And so having Netanyahu on the board, what does that do in terms of what can actually be done for Israel to be held accountable for what it's doing on ground and to ensure that there is in fact peace according to what the people of Palestine are looking for and according to the two-state solution?
So one thing, no one has the veto power. The chair has the final casting vote and perhaps in a way veto power, but none of the other member has anything, including Israel, that they can veto it. So Israeli Prime Minister is one member, and how about the remaining 58 members plus the chairman? So 58 members would also prevail upon. So this is a kind of a arrangement, the framework which they have really drawn to implement these 20 points, and out of which about 3 points have been implemented. The remaining points are to be implemented now after the Board of Peace is deployed, and they have already announced about the third tier of Board of Peace, and that is second tier of Board of Peace is the executive board, and executive board, then the third tier is the technocratic government, of which the chief has been announced, the Ali Shah. He's the chief and he would be running day to day. So there's a complete framework, and once that is deployed completely, so Israeli Prime Minister would not really be able to just have a free hand the way he's been having free hand and killing every day in scores of people, hundreds of people. Now it would not be possible for him. And then more importantly, what I can envisage at this stage that within next few days' time, I don't see that it could be more than 15 days if I just give a little estimate of it. That the ISF, the International Stabilization Force, would also be deployed, and which should be deployed, and Pakistan should participate in it. Pakistan has a very clear thoughts about it, that Pakistan is not going to get involved in the disarming of the Hamas. But then we are probably mixing up the points, while debating in various platforms. Basically, there is a mechanism given at what stage Hamas is going to disarm. Now, the technical critic government has been informed. Hamas would be handing over those weapons to that committee, technocratic committee. And then that was negotiated while the 20 points peace plan was being negotiated with the help of Qatar and Egypt. So at that time, there was consultation, although there was some disagreements. So things and the framework, once it's completely deployed and once the on-ground things starts happening, my point is that, yes, I can criticize that, ISAF and the stabilization force and deployment of it, it's a detrimental to this thing and that thing. But unless that is done, we cannot really protect the interests of the Palestinians, basically.
Thank you very much,
And they will be
Ambassador Jamil, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. There is, of course, a lot that is necessary for peace to be implemented in Gaza. And while, of course, these measures are welcome, it remains to be seen how they will be implemented and what they do for what truly is required on ground. Lastly, we're going to take a look at what is happening in Bangladesh and the kind of political developments that we see in light of the upcoming elections next month. There is a lot of discussion as to what party is going to come up victorious and who really is going to lead the country. And so among the discussions that are taking place is the very important developments around Jamaat-e-Islami and the kind of comeback that it has been seeing for quite some time now. For that, we've been joined by Barrister Shahriar Kabir, and we'll speak to him with regards to what's going on. Thank you, Mr. Kabir, for being part of the newsroom. In terms of what we're hearing reports and the kind of sentiment that exists in Bangladesh, it seems that Jamaat-e-Islami is really enjoying the support of the people, according to what many polls are suggesting. Is that truly the situation on ground, and why do you think that is the current situation? What is making Jamaat-e-Islami the most popular party at the moment, or the most likely candidate? And you can disagree too.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to give my salam and greetings to all of the people of Pakistan. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. In terms of last 53 years, the country passing through two problems. Number one, corruption. The corruption is everywhere. And therefore, though we have potential, we did not do well. Number two, we must have a knowledge-based society, but the society is unskill-based. So rather than putting the people on the right track, stopping the brain drain, and utilizing the foreign remittance to update a society where most of the young people are high-skilled. So these two programs, and eventually, the main things to build up a nation with highly qualified peoples, this attract the peoples of Bangladesh after July Revolution. And the people actually wanted to believe the last 53 years, Jamaat-e-Islam, two of the leaders of Jamaat-e-Islam had run two ministries from 2001 to 2006. And that is the two ministry did not had any involvement whatsoever with any corruption. Therefore, the people of Bangladesh this time and all the survey had taken over or carried out by different agencies showing that the popularity of Jamaat-e-Islam is going increased day by day. But the real problem is not that. The problem in 2008 election might be reflecting this time. That is election engineering. So the people supposed to choose their own representative, but I'm still afraid there are so many symptoms in the field which showing there might be a high possibility of election engineering, and that election engineering might destroy the people's life. You see, the people don't want the defaulter border in the election. But unfortunately, this time also, 30% from the biggest political party of Bangladesh nominated their candidate who are defaulter border. Again, dual citizenship, that is another issue. So if these two issues and the election engineering is not carrying out by the civil bureaucrat, then I hope Jamaat-e-Islami will go into the power. But still I have hope. And I wish the election in jail will not going to happen, and the election will be going free, fair, and credible.
Absolutely, and that is the hope for all. But in terms of how we're looking at the current political dynamics, how do you think the BNP is faring? We've had their leader come in after a long exile, and of course the previous leadership after years of struggle, and then of course dealing with long-term illnesses, has also passed away. How are the people looking at the BNP and the potential that it provides?
Look, the BNP leader, that is Mr. Tariq Rahman, who is the son of late President Ziaur Rahman and late Prime Minister Begum Khaleda Zia. So these two identical persons have two ideologies. Number one, they never enacted any law which is opposed the Islam or Quran or Sunnah. Second thing, they always fight against Indian hegemony. So when the Tariq Rahman came to Bangladesh, the vibes of Tariq Rahman did not work, that I will say. Why? When he returned Bangladesh and he called for a public gathering and meeting, but the public did not attend that much. How many people attend the janaza of Begum Khaleda Zia? So these two things, and Tariq Rahman based on the ideology of Ziaur Rahman. So he have to show that still the BNP is the BNP of Ziaur Rahman. But in field, that did not work. People now are saying the BNP of Ziaur Rahman is not the same BNP of Tariq Rahman. So Tariq Rahman's popularity based on Ziaur Rahman is not working. Secondly, he did not give any assurance to the people how he will implement or how he will deliver the Bangladesh as a future leader, how he will stop corruption, how he will deal with the July Charter, how he will uphold the young people. Look, the young people who are involved in the July Revolution must have an indemnity, but BNP is totally silent about that. Again,
Right.
the BNP and Jamaat is, yeah, please go ahead.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, Barrister Shahriar, but thank you so much for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Your point is well taken in terms of what it is that the nation is truly looking at from all the different parties and the likely candidates. But what's essential is that there are free, fair and transparent elections in Bangladesh, and that, of course, is the hope of the people of Bangladesh and, of course, the hope of the people of Pakistan and the world over. We'll be updating you as more news comes in and as more developments take place. But that's all we have from the newsroom today. We'll now see you tomorrow.